The coffee smelled over-brewed, and my father's thumb was pressed so tightly against the stem of his wineglass that the skin around his knuckle had turned pale. "Who asked you to speak, Avery?" He said it quietly. That somehow made the words heavier. Rear Admiral Thomas Mercer sat 3 places down from me. Retired now, silver-haired and straight-backed. He was a man my father had admired for most of his adult life. To my father, Admiral Mercer represented nearly everything the Navy had once promised him and everything he believed it had later withheld. My brother Connor sat frozen with his fork halfway to his mouth. My mother stared at the white tablecloth. Beside my chair, hidden inside my handbag, was a sealed Navy envelope I had not opened yet. My father believed I still spent most of my career doing administrative work for the Navy. He had believed some version of that story for almost 20 years. What he did not know was that the destroyer he had just criticized over dinner, the ship he had described as hesitant, poorly handled, and almost disastrous, had been mine. And the 7 seconds he had mocked were 7 seconds I had spent deciding whether to place my own hull between an incoming threat and an aircraft carrier carrying nearly 5,000 people. I lowered the serving dish onto the table. Admiral Mercer looked at me. Not casually. Not politely. He looked at me the way a senior officer looks at someone when an old memory has suddenly walked into the room wearing civilian clothes. My father mistook the silence for obedience. "Go help your mother with the coffee," he said. The Admiral's cup touched the saucer with a soft click. My father had no idea what he had just started. I grew up in Cedar Hollow, Virginia, a small town filled with church bells, wet pine forests, old porches, and roads that seemed to lead either toward the water or away from it. In our house, the Navy was never merely a profession. It was a religion. And my father, Ethan Calloway, considered himself one of its most faithful believers. A framed photograph of him hung in the front hallway. He was 26 in that picture, standing on the bridge wing of a frigate, his face turned toward the wind, his white cover tucked beneath one arm. Every visitor saw the photograph. Almost every visitor heard the story behind it. My father had once been destined for great things. He had once been the officer everyone watched. He had once been one decision away from the sea command he believed should have been his. Almost. He retired as a Navy captain in '06, with an honorable career and enough accomplishments to satisfy almost anyone. Almost. He never received the particular ship he believed he deserved. So the Navy became 2 things to him at once. It was the institution that had recognized his talent. And it was the institution that had betrayed him. That contradiction shaped our entire household. Praise was scarce. Correction was constant. When Connor brought home an A-, Dad wanted to know what the highest grade in the class had been. When Connor made varsity baseball, Dad shook his hand and told him he had done well. When I won a statewide history competition at 13, my father looked at the certificate for several seconds and said, "Apparently they hand out trophies for everything now." My mother, Margaret, stood at the kitchen sink with lavender dish soap covering her hands. After Dad left the room, she turned toward me and quietly straightened the ribbon on the certificate. "That blue looks good on you," she said. It was such a small thing that I barely noticed it. Years later, I would remember every word. Connor was 3 years older than me, and he learned early how to survive our father. Agree when agreement was easiest. Laugh at the right stories. Want the things Dad understood. Business school. A respectable company. A house with white columns. A career that could be explained in one sentence at a dinner party. I wanted the sea. That was a problem. When I was 12, I watched a carrier homecoming on television. Sailors in dress whites lined the deck while families waited below with handmade signs. Little kids sat on their parents' shoulders. Someone had brought balloons. A band played badly because the wind kept stealing the notes. I sat cross-legged on the living room carpet. I'm going to come home like that someday. My father turned a page in his newspaper. They let just about anybody walk onto a flight deck these days. He never looked up, The sentence stayed with me. Not because it was the cruelest thing he had ever said. Because it was so easy for him to say it. At 15, I built a model destroyer at the dining room table. I painted the hull gray. I researched signal flags. I measured the tiny deck fittings twice before gluing them in place. Dad came into the room, looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, and said, "Connor needs this table for his college applications." My model disappeared into a cardboard box before the paint had fully dried. At 17, I brought home an acceptance letter and a Navy ROTC scholarship. My hands shook when I placed the envelope in front of him. He opened it. Read the first paragraph. Then he looked at me. Supply, maybe, medical, something practical. My mother was cutting apples at the kitchen counter. The knife stopped. For half a second, she looked directly at me. Then she resumed cutting. I interpreted that silence as agreement. I was wrong. But for the next 20 years, I believed I had been right. I left Cedar Hollow at 18 because staying there had started to feel like slowly disappearing. There was no dramatic argument. No slammed door. No speech delivered from the front porch. I packed 2 duffel bags, kissed my mother on the cheek, shook my father's hand because that was how our family did things, and drove away before sunrise. On the passenger seat was a note my mother had slipped between my uniforms. It said, "The ocean is bigger than this house. So are you." I kept that note until the ink faded. I never told her how much it meant. The Navy did not care that my father thought I was too much in the wrong ways and never enough in the right ones. The Navy cared whether I knew my ship, whether I understood my equipment, whether I could make a decision at 3 in the morning with rain striking the bridge windows sideways while a junior officer waited for my answer. It cared whether I could remain useful when the plan stopped working. That was freedom. My first ship smelled like fresh paint, diesel, hot metal, and coffee that had been sitting in a pot too long. I stood watch at night with the black Atlantic stretching beyond the bridge windows. And I learned something important. Fear becomes useful once you give it a job. Years later, in the Arabian Sea, we received a distress call from a merchant vessel after an engine room fire. The sea was rough enough to throw spray across our bow. The helicopter crew had one narrow window to make the approach. I still remember the red glow inside Combat Information Center. I remember the operations specialist reading the coordinates. I remember one of my chiefs looking at me and asking a simple question. "Ma'am, what do you want us to do?" I changed our position. I accepted the weather risk. Then I gave the helicopter crew the best approach angle we could make. 3 injured mariners came off that ship alive. No newspaper wrote about it. My father never knew. By then, I had stopped collecting accomplishments to carry home. Master Chief Daniel Reyes noticed that before I did. He had served longer than some of my junior officers had been alive. His face looked carved from old wood, and he possessed a rare talent for saying one sentence when 10 would have been easier. After one difficult deployment, he found me alone on the bridge wing before sunrise. "You keep staring at the horizon like somebody from home is supposed to appear on it," he said. "I'm checking traffic." "No, ma'am." Then he walked away. That was Reyes. He saw people clearly enough to make them uncomfortable. I missed birthdays. Weddings. One Christmas. My mother's 65th birthday dinner. I called her from a narrow steel passageway while the ventilation system roared above me. "Are you safe?" she asked. "Yes." "Are your people safe?" "Yes." "Then call me again when you can." My father got on the phone afterward. "Connor managed to make it," he said. I stared at the gray bulkhead in front of me. Something inside me finally became still. That was the day I stopped waiting for my father. I did not hate him. I did not forgive him. I simply stopped waiting for him to become the man I needed. I made lieutenant commander. Then commander. I became a department head. Then an executive officer. Eventually, at 38, I took command of a guided missile destroyer. At the change of command ceremony, The wind snapped the flag so sharply that it sounded like canvas tearing. My crew stood in formation. My orders were read aloud. I stepped forward and accepted responsibility for a warship, her weapons, her engineering plant, her mission, and every sailor aboard her. I did not invite my family. That decision was mine. I knew my mother would have come. Connor probably would have come. Even Dad might have shown up, if only to examine the ceremony for mistakes. But I had spent too many years carrying beautiful things home and watching my father reduce them until they became small enough for him to control. So when he asked what my new assignment was, I told him I had received another administrative position. It was a lie built out of old wounds. He believed me because it fit the version of me he preferred. For the next 3 years, my family assumed I spent most of my time behind a desk. The truth was different. I commanded a destroyer through one of the most dangerous afternoons of my life. The attack came in a contested strait in spring. The water was narrow. The radar picture was crowded. Land was close enough to make every contact feel personal. We were screening a carrier strike group when the warnings started arriving almost on top of each other. Sea-skimming missiles. Fast-moving boats. Multiple approach axes. A layered attack designed to overwhelm the decision cycle and force somebody into making the wrong move. People imagine combat as screaming. What I remember is the opposite. Calm voices. Flat voices. Professionals becoming more precise as danger became less theoretical. My air defense officer called the first track. My tactical action officer updated the second. The carrier was at the center of the formation, but geometry had placed my ship dangerously close to the threat line. Not in the perfect position. Close enough. I saw the solution before anyone finished explaining the problem. We could hold station and engage from where doctrine expected us to be. Or we could move. Moving would take my destroyer closer to the threat. It would also place us between that threat and the carrier. 7 seconds. That was all I had. 7 seconds to weigh the lives of hundreds of sailors aboard my ship against thousands aboard another. 7 seconds to decide whether the safest order for my crew was actually the wrong order for the entire force. I gave the command. Turn hard. My ship moved. Every department moved with it. Weapons. Engineering. Combat systems. The bridge. No hesitation. No debate. No second vote. We crossed the geometry and took the engagement from the position that mattered most. The engagement lasted only minutes. Memory stretched it into hours. When it ended, the carrier was untouched. The strike group remained intact. My ship had taken damage. But we were afloat. My people were alive. Later, a 19-year-old petty officer named Mia Parker told me she had been in an interior compartment with no windows when the ship made the turn. I knew you had decided, she said. I could feel it through the deck. That meant more to me than the medal. The Silver Star came months later. There was a ceremony. There were official statements. There were people in uniforms speaking carefully about courage and command decisions. I stood there listening as someone described the decision as though it belonged to a stranger I had once met. I did not send a photograph home. I did not mail the ceremony program. My mother found out anyway. I did not know that yet. A year after the engagement, I came home on leave. That was when my father told me Rear Admiral Thomas Mercer was coming to dinner. The name mattered. Mercer had been one of Dad's senior officers when Dad was young. He had written evaluations my father still remembered almost sentence for sentence. To Dad, Mercer represented the version of his own life that existed before disappointment hardened into personality. For an entire week, Dad prepared as if an inspection were coming. He polished the silver. Bought expensive wine. Rehearsed old stories. Timed the punchlines. Corrected the table settings twice. Watching him made me feel something I didn't expect. Pity. He was 71 years old and still trying to earn the approval of a man he had admired for 4 decades. I understood that hunger. I had inherited it. The afternoon of the dinner. Dad stopped me in the kitchen. "Thomas Mercer is serious," he said. "Tonight is not the night for Navy office stories." I said nothing. "You'll help your mother. Keep the conversation pleasant. I'll steer the discussion." Still nothing. He stepped closer. "Understood?" I looked at him. Understood. I had used that word with officers I respected. With sailors I trusted. With people who had earned it. That afternoon I used it because I was tired. I had decided I could make myself smaller for one more evening. Inside my handbag was the sealed Navy envelope that had arrived 2 days earlier through official channels. I knew from the markings what it contained. Orders. My next command assignment. I had not opened it. For once, I wanted one important thing to belong only to me for a few more hours. Mercer arrived exactly at 5. Tall. Gray-haired. Still composed. Dad greeted him at the door like an old captain greeting a reviewing officer. He introduced Connor first, complete with his company and job title. Then he turned toward me. "This is our daughter, Avery. She's still with the Navy." "Still with the Navy?" Mercer's eyes stayed on me a fraction longer than they should have. Dinner moved carefully after that. Dad told his stories. Connor talked business. My mother carried plates between rooms. I helped twice. Mercer tried to ask me what I did. Twice. My father answered both times. "She does administrative work now." The second time, he lightly touched my wrist as if I were 12 years old again. I let it go. Everything I had trained for had taught me how to remain calm in a room where someone else had mistaken control for authority. After the main course, Mercer asked about the strait. My father brightened immediately. He had read every article. He gave an assured summary of the engagement, built mostly from incomplete public reporting and old experience. Mercer listened. Then Dad leaned back and shook his head. "That destroyer reacted late," he said. The captain hesitated. Mercer did not answer. Dad continued. 7 seconds is an eternity in that environment. They nearly got the carrier into trouble. My mother stopped beside the sideboard. Connor nodded as if he understood exactly what Dad was talking about. I looked down at my plate. I could have stayed silent. I almost did. Then I thought of Mia Parker below decks, 19 years old, trusting the turn beneath her boots. The destroyer had not hesitated. I spoke. They needed to close the screen before committing to the engagement. The maneuver protected the carrier. My father's face tightened. "Who asked you to speak?" Nobody moved. He gave Mercer an embarrassed smile. "She reads these things and thinks she was actually there." I looked at him. He kept going. "Avery, go make some coffee. Let the people who understand command discuss command." That was the worst sentence he had ever said to me. Not because it insulted me. Because for 30 years I had helped him say it. Every time I hid my work. Every time I laughed off the ship questions. Every time I accepted the smaller version of my life because correcting him seemed more exhausting than tolerating him. If you have ever sat at a family table while someone confidently explains your own life as if you were not qualified to speak about it, you know the particular ache of that moment. Sometimes the first person who has to stop reducing you is yourself. I reached for the coffee pot. Mercer spoke. "Commander Calloway." My hand stopped. My father frowned. Connor looked at me. I turned toward the Admiral. "Yes, sir." That was all I said. Mercer stood slowly. Age had made the movement more careful, but rank leaves certain habits in a person long after retirement. Everyone in the room felt it. My father half rose out of instinct. Mercer looked directly at him. "Ethan." Dad tried a nervous laugh. "Thomas, she's my daughter." "I know," Mercer said. Then he paused. "You know her name. I'm not sure you've ever really known her." The air in the dining room changed. Mercer turned slightly toward the table. "This is Commander Avery Calloway, United States Navy." My brother slowly lowered his glass. My mother covered her mouth with one hand. Mercer continued. "Until recently, She commanded the destroyer you just criticized. My father's eyes moved from Mercer to me. Then back again. Mercer did not rush. During last spring's engagement in the Strait, her ship maneuvered across the threat axis and screened my carrier. My father blinked. I was the strike group commander. Silence. Complete silence. The 7 seconds you just called hesitation were the time Commander Calloway used to recognize that the safest position for her ship was not necessarily the safest position for the force. My father stared at him. She moved her ship between the threat and my carrier. She held that position under pressure. The carrier survived the engagement intact. Dad whispered, "Thomas?" Mercer did not raise his voice. There were nearly 5,000 sailors aboard my carrier. I know exactly what her decision meant. My father's hand trembled once against the table. It was small. Almost invisible. Mercer looked back at me. She was awarded the Silver Star. Connor's expression went blank. My father looked at me as though someone had quietly replaced his daughter while he wasn't paying attention. "She never told us," Mercer said. I answered before I could think about it. "You never asked." 4 words. No anger. No speech. Only the truth. Mercer gave one slow nod. Then he turned toward my father. "I've spent a year wanting to shake the hand of the officer who made that call. I didn't expect to meet her while watching her father send her to make coffee." My father looked down. That was when I understood something. The revelation had not humiliated him. His own behavior had. I had not arranged any of it. I had not invited Mercer. I had not announced my rank. I had not brought my medal to dinner. My father had built that room exactly the way he wanted it. The truth had simply walked into it. Mercer extended his hand. I crossed the room and took it. His grip was firm. "Well done, Commander." "Thank you, sir." One witness. One sentence. It reached someplace inside me that applause never had. Mercer left not long afterward. At the door, he told me I owed him the full story of the maneuver someday. Then he thanked my mother by name for the dinner and stepped into the cool Virginia evening. The front door closed. My father turned toward me. The old reflex returned immediately. "You embarrassed me." I wasn't surprised. "In my own home," he continued, "in front of Thomas Mercer. Do you have any idea what that man means to me?" "Yes." "You could have told me." "Yes." The answers made him more desperate because there was nothing to argue with. Finally he asked, "Then why didn't you?" I looked at him. "Because you always found a way to make the things I loved feel smaller." His mouth opened. I continued before he could rebuild the old version of the story. "So I stopped bringing them to you." That was the longest thing I said that night. Connor was standing in the doorway. "You could have told me, Avery." I looked at him. "You liked being the successful one." His face changed. Not anger. Recognition. He sat down. My father walked into his study and closed the door. No apology. No explanation. No dramatic victory. I stood beside the dining table for a moment and felt exhausted. For years, I had imagined that being seen by my father would feel like justice. It didn't. It felt late. My mother touched my arm. "Come upstairs." She led me to the spare bedroom. The house smelled faintly of dust and lavender. From the top shelf of the closet, she took down a shoebox with corners softened by years of handling. Before she opened it, she noticed my handbag. "What is in that envelope?" I had forgotten about it. "Orders, probably." "You haven't opened them?" "No." She nodded. "Then open this first." She lifted the lid. The box was full of me. Newspaper clippings. Printed photographs of ships I had served on. An old base newspaper with my name circled in blue ink. A change of command program from the day I took the destroyer. The ceremony I had never told her about. And beneath everything else, folded along pale lines from repeated reading, was a printed copy of my Silver Star citation. I sat down on the bed. My mother remained standing. "I knew," she said. I looked up. About the medal? About more than the medal. She pulled out a small spiral notebook. Inside were dates. Ship names. Ports. Promotions. Things I had mentioned once during hurried phone calls I assumed she barely remembered. She had written them all down. I turned the pages slowly. The mother I had spent 20 years believing had chosen silence because she did not care had been keeping a private history of my life. I read about the strait before I knew it was you. She said, one report finally used your name. She swallowed. I was sitting on the stairs. I looked at her. I had to put the phone down because my hands were shaking. I couldn't speak. She pressed her lips together. I was proud of you. That sentence hurt more than my father's insult. Because I had wanted to hear it for so long. I should have told you. She continued. I kept telling myself I was protecting the peace in this house. Your father could turn everything into competition. Even pride. She looked down at the shoebox. So I kept my pride private. I shook my head. She stopped me. No, let me say it correctly. She took a breath. I loved you, I saw you, and I was still a coward. Both things can be true. That was my mother. Quiet all her life. Precise when the truth finally demanded a voice. I thought your silence meant you agreed with him. I know. For 20 years. I know. Neither of us cried. We did something harder. We stayed in that room with the truth. After a while, she pointed toward my handbag. Open your orders. I pulled out the sealed envelope. The paper tore louder than it should have. Inside was the official notification I had expected and still wasn't ready to see in black ink. Major command. A larger ship. A larger crew. A responsibility I had spent most of my adult life working toward. My mother read the first page over my shoulder. Her hand flew to her mouth. This time, she didn't hide what she felt. Oh, Avery. Her voice broke. Then she laughed. A soft, stunned little laugh. My girl. 2 words. That was the second revelation of the night. Not simply that I had earned another command, but that my mother had been waiting for decades to say out loud how proud she was. The next morning, I left Cedar Hollow before breakfast. Rain had started before dawn. I sat in my car at the end of my parents' driveway and listened to the drops ticking against the windshield. I did not feel victorious. I felt lighter. There is a difference. Victory needs someone beneath you. Relief only requires the weight to be gone. My father did not come outside. My mother did. She stood beneath the porch roof wearing a blue robe and raised one hand. I raised mine. Then I drove away. The family changed slowly after that. Connor called first. No joke. No explanation. No attempt to make things comfortable. He simply asked, what was the strait really like? So I told him. A little. He listened. That was new. My father became smaller, but not because anyone punished him. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no public disgrace. No ruined pension. No great confrontation witnessed by the town. He simply lost control of the family story. At gatherings, he stopped describing my career because people now asked me directly. When Connor talked about work, Dad listened. When I talked about ships, Dad stayed quiet. At first, his silence felt like resentment. Later, I think it became uncertainty. He had spent his life believing he should be the authority on everything he loved. Now the person at his own table who understood the Navy better than he did was the daughter he had trained himself not to see. A month after the dinner, I received a handwritten letter from him. 3 paragraphs about ordinary things. The porch. The garden. A neighbor's surgery. In the middle was one sentence about the strait. He got the maneuver right. Exactly right. I read that sentence 4 times. I did not call it an apology. It wasn't one. But I kept the letter. I wrote back and told him one honest thing about my next assignment. Then I added, you can ask me anything you want to know. I left the door open. Not because he had earned unlimited access to me. Because I no longer needed the door locked for protection. Months later, at my major change of command ceremony, the morning was bright and sharp, with a hard wind coming off the water. My crew stood in formation. The bell sounded. My orders were read aloud. Every part of my life that had once been minimized at my father's table was now public, official, and impossible to dismiss. My name, my rank, my authority, my responsibility. Admiral Mercer came. So did Master Chief Reyes, retired now and complaining about his knees before he had even found a chair. My mother sat in the front row. She had the old shoebox in her car. Connor sat beside her. My father stood at the back. Not in the front row. Not in the center. He had chosen the back. For once, it seemed he understood that the day did not require him to be important. After the ceremony, Reyes shook my hand. He looked toward my family. Then he looked back at me. So, he said, the horizon finally showed up. I smiled. Yes, Master Chief. He leaned a little closer. Don't confuse being seen with being made. I never forgot that. People can recognize you. People can praise you. People can finally admit they were wrong. But they do not get credit for the person you became while they were refusing to look. Near the end of the reception, my father approached. He was wearing the same dark jacket he had worn during Admiral Mercer's dinner. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The old version of me would have rushed to fill the silence. I didn't. He looked past me toward the ship. Then he looked back at me. His jaw moved once before he finally spoke. Tell me about her. I knew exactly what he meant. My ship. Not my office. Not my paperwork. Not the tiny insignia he once dismissed. My ship. 30 years late, perhaps more. I could have punished him with the lateness. I could have told him he had lost the right to ask. Some part of me had rehearsed that answer for years. But standing there, I realized I didn't need it. So I told him. I told him about the crew. The engineering plant. The way the ship handled through a hard turn. The young officers still learning what leadership felt like. The chiefs who could recognize a problem before an alarm ever sounded. The weight of knowing that hundreds of people trusted a decision I might have only seconds to make. He listened. He did not correct me. That was all. It was not forgiveness. It was not a restored childhood. It did not return a single lost year. It was simply one honest conversation on a bright pier. I let it remain exactly that size. For most of my life, I thought peace would arrive when my father finally admitted I was worthy. The Navy taught me something different. At sea, a ship does not become real because someone on shore believes in it. It is real because it holds together in bad weather. Because its crew trusts one another. Because when the warning sounds, people go to their stations. Worth works the same way. It is built in what you do when nobody applauds. It is built in the decisions you make when the room misunderstands you. It is built every time you refuse to become smaller just to make someone else comfortable. My father eventually saw me. My brother eventually listened. My mother, I discovered, had seen me all along. But none of those things created me. They simply caught up. For years, I believed my duty was to convince the people at my family's table that I deserved to take up space. I finally realized that was never my assignment. Someone else's version of you is not your duty station. You do not have to live there. Sometimes the most powerful change does not arrive with shouting, punishment, or revenge. Sometimes it comes when a room full of people finally has to confront a truth that has been standing quietly in front of them for years. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand at your full height. Say almost nothing, and let the truth introduce you.